He slammed the thick envelope onto the dinner table, the sound echoing louder than thunder in the silent room. The candles she had lit flickered, their flames trembling as if they too sensed the storm about to break. "Sign these," he said coldly, sliding the divorce papers across the polished wood. Her hand froze halfway to the wine glass. Just hours ago she had carefully cooked his favorite meal, set the table with roses from their garden, dressed in the emerald silk gown he once called his favorite. She had hoped, prayed, that maybe tonight they could find each other again. Instead she was staring at the man she loved, and his eyes were strangers. "David, what is this?" Her voice cracked, a fragile whisper. "What it looks like," he replied, leaning back with a smirk. "Our marriage is over, and so is your claim to everything we built. The company is mine, the house is mine, the accounts, the investments, mine." Her eyes widened in horror. "That's not true. We built this together." He leaned forward, his tone dripping with cruelty. "You signed it all away months ago. Those restructuring documents, every signature was your gift to me. And now—" His lips curled into a chilling smile. "You can't even afford a lawyer to fight me." The candles sputtered. The salmon on the table grew cold. Her heart shattered. Yet in the shadows of that night, a fire was about to be born. "Hello, my beautiful, loyal, and loving family. Welcome back to another story that speaks to the heart. Before we continue, I want to take a moment for you, not just as viewers, but as part of this family we've built together. May your homes always be filled with peace. May your tables never lack food, and may your hearts always find comfort in love. For those of you carrying heavy burdens, may you find strength tonight. For those struggling with illness, may healing surround you. For anyone feeling alone, remember, you are not alone here. Together, we are one family, united by these stories that remind us of life's struggles, betrayals, and victories. This story is not just about wealth or power. It is about love, trust, betrayal, and the strength to rise again. It's about learning that sometimes the very people we trust the most can turn into strangers, but it is also about finding the courage to fight back and the wisdom to protect what is ours. Family, if you are listening right now, I ask you to join me in a small ritual of unity. If your heart is true, type "present" in the comments. If your love is real, write "I stand with this family." Together we are not just storyteller and listeners, we are a community that supports each other, across cities, across countries, across every border. Remember, my dear family, every time you write, every time you engage, you are not only sharing your voice, you are strengthening this bond. And as we continue into this story, I promise you, the lessons hidden within will touch your heart and remind you of your own strength. Now, let's return to the story. The rain had been falling for 3 days without pause, soaking the city streets and leaving the small university campus drowned in puddles. The sound of water dripping through the broken roof of the library was the only music she had that night. She sat at the wooden desk near the corner, her old notebook spread wide, her hair damp from the storm, her stomach empty. Chiara had been living on nothing but instant noodles and black coffee for weeks. Every coin mattered, and even one lost penny meant skipping another meal. She couldn't afford new clothes. Her winter coat had holes at the sleeves, and the shoes she wore leaked whenever it rained. But none of that mattered to her. She believed knowledge was her only escape, her only armor. Her mother's words rang in her ears every night. "Love is beautiful, my child, but it is knowledge that will protect you. Learn, fight, survive." Most nights, the library staff would leave by midnight, but Chiara stayed behind, quietly hiding in the shadows, pretending to be asleep until they locked the doors. She studied under the dim emergency lights, scribbling notes until dawn, too afraid to waste even 1 hour. Yet, life was not kind. Rent was overdue. The landlord had already warned her twice. Her scholarship covered tuition, but nothing more. Her classmates went out to eat, to celebrate, to live, while she survived on silence, hunger, and stubborn dreams. One night, as thunder rolled across the sky, Chiara found herself staring at her reflection in the library's cracked window. Her eyes looked older than her 20 years. "Will I ever make it?" she whispered to herself. The answer was silence. But destiny was listening. That same night, a voice broke the stillness. "Do you always talk to yourself?" She spun around, startled. Standing at the end of the aisle was a young man, his hair dripping with rain, his smile careless and warm. He wore a worn-out hoodie, his backpack slung loosely over his shoulder. His name was Daniel. He was a student too, though barely scraping by. His family had lost everything years ago, and he was no stranger to hunger. But unlike Chiara, who carried her pain quietly, Daniel wore his struggles with a grin. "I wasn't talking to myself," Chiara muttered, embarrassed. Daniel walked closer, placing a cup of cheap instant coffee on her desk. "Then talk to me instead. You look like you need this more than I do." That was the first time someone had noticed her exhaustion, the first time someone had offered without expecting anything in return. They began studying together in the dim library corners. At first it was awkward, two strangers bound by shared desperation. But slowly the silence turned into conversations, conversations into laughter, and laughter into late-night confessions. He told her how he once slept in train statio, Anne's when he had no home. She told him about the nights she went to bed with nothing but water to drink. Together they found comfort in knowing that neither of them was alone anymore. Weeks passed. The library became their world. They sat side by side, sometimes sharing one textbook, sometimes sharing one sandwich when luck allowed. Daniel often teased her for being too serious, for reading until her eyes burned. She teased him back for falling asleep on open books. But behind the jokes was something stronger, something unspoken, something dangerous. One night, as the rain fell harder than ever, the power went out. The library plunged into darkness, leaving only the soft glow of their phone screens. Chiara shivered, hugging her coat. Daniel noticed. Without hesitation, he slipped his hoodie over her shoulders. "You'll catch a cold," he said simply. Her heart stuttered. For the first time she realized she wasn't invisible. Someone saw her. Someone cared. And in that fragile, stolen moment, Chiara felt warmth, not from the hoodie, but from the boy sitting beside her in the dark. She didn't know it then, but that night was the beginning of everything. The rise, the love, the betrayal, the war. For in that library corner, while the world drowned in rain, two broken souls found each other, and unknowingly planted the seed of a story that would one day shake everything they believed in. In the weeks that followed, the library transformed from a place of silence into the backdrop of their secret world. The rain no longer sounded lonely, because now there were two people listening to it together. Daniel and Chiara fell into a rhythm. Every evening, as the lamps dimmed and the crowds left, they would gather at their corner table, spread their books, and share whatever scraps of food they had. Sometimes it was half a sandwich, sometimes it was just a packet of biscuit. But together, it always felt enough. Daniel had a way of making the unbearable bearable. When Chiara's hands trembled from too much caffeine and too little sleep, he would slide his notes across the table and say, "Here, copy mine. Your handwriting's better anyway." When her shoes tore from constant use, he patched them clumsily with tape, grinning, "Designer upgrade, limited edition." She would laugh despite herself, and that laughter, light, pure, unexpected, was more valuable than gold to Daniel. They began to share dreams in whispers. Chiara confessed how she longed to create something of her own, a business, a company, something that would lift her out of the cycle of poverty. Daniel admitted that he was tired of being powerless, tired of always counting pennies. He wanted to prove to the world that he could be more than just another forgotten boy. One night, they sat on the library steps, the rain having finally cleared. The sky glittered with stars, the air crisp with the smell of wet earth. Daniel leaned back, gazing upward. "Do you ever think," he asked, "that maybe we're meant for more? That maybe we're not just two poor kids stuck in a library?" Chiara hugged her knees, her eyes following his. "I think about it every night. But dreaming is easy. Living it, that's the hard part." Daniel turned to her then, his voice steady. "Then let's not just dream. Let's build it. Together." That was the first promise. And in her heart, Chiara believed him. The bond grew stronger with every small act of sacrifice. When Chiara's scholarship money ran dry, Daniel worked double shifts at a cafe, often returning with burns on his hands from washing dishes. He never complained. He only smiled and told her, "One day, we won't have to struggle like this." And when Daniel fell sick from exhaustion, it was Chiara who stayed by his side, skipping her own classes to nurse him back to health. She spent her last coins on medicine instead of food, lying to him with a soft smile when he asked if she had eaten. "Of course I have," she would say, though her stomach growled in protest. Through hunger, through sleepless nights, through endless exams, they held on to each other. They became one another's anchor, their strength, their family. The world outside noticed too. Their professors whispered about their dedication, their classmates envied their partnership. People said, "They're inseparable, they'll make it one day." For Chiara, every moment with Daniel felt like proof that love could conquer anything. His presence turned her cracked shoes and empty fridge into something bearable. He was her hope, her laughter, her dream. For Daniel, Chiara's determination was a flame he could never look away from. She made him believe he was capable of more than failure. In her eyes, he wasn't a boy from nothing. He was a man who could change everything. One evening, after weeks of saving, Daniel surprised her with a small paper bag. Inside was a pair of second-hand gloves, slightly worn but warm. "They're not new," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "But winter's coming, and I can't watch your hands freeze while you write." Chiara's eyes welled with tears. No one had ever given her a gift like that. Not because of its cost, but because of its thought. She slipped the gloves on, holding them to her chest. "They're perfect," she whispered. Moments like that etched themselves into their souls. Small gestures, small sacrifices, woven together, they became a love story stronger than wealth, deeper than comfort. But what truly sealed their bond was a night of complete despair. Chiara had received a letter from the landlord, a final warning. She had 1 week to pay the overdue rent or she would be thrown out. She broke down in the library, burying her face in her arms. Daniel sat beside her silently, then took her hand in his. "We'll figure it out. I'll work another job. I'll do whatever it takes. You won't go through this alone." She lifted her tear-streaked face. "But it's not fair. You deserve better than being dragged down by me." Daniel shook his head firmly. "Don't ever say that. If I have one slice of bread, half of it is yours. If I have one dream, it's ours. That's what love means." And for the first time in a long time, Chiara believed she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for them. That night, as they left the library hand in hand, the world didn't feel so heavy. The rain had stopped, the air smelled of new beginnings, and their footsteps echoed like a quiet promise to the universe. They had nothing, but they had each other. And sometimes that feels like everything. The idea was born on a night of hunger. Daniel and Chiara were sitting on the cold steps outside the library, sharing a cup of instant noodles between them. The packet had been bought with the last of Daniel's tips from the cafe. They ate slowly, stretching every bite, laughing about how 1 noodle each was their new diet plan. But beneath the laughter, something deeper stirred. "We can't live like this forever," Chiara murmured, watching the steam rise from the cup. "Studying, struggling, starving. There has to be more." Daniel stared into the night, his eyes reflecting the flickering streetlights. "Then let's build something of our own. A business. Even if it's small. At least it'll be ours." Her head turned sharply toward him. His words lit something in her heart, something she had buried under survival. Do you mean it? He nodded firmly. We may not have money, but we have ideas, we have determination, and together we're unstoppable. That was the seed. They started with nothing but borrowed laptops, broken chairs, and a kitchen table in Daniel's cramped apartment. Their office was the living room, cluttered with books, notebooks, and coffee cups. The internet was often cut off because they couldn't pay the bill, so Kiara studied late at the university, downloading resources onto a flash drive to use later. The business? Digit. AL Solutions, small website designs, basic marketing strategies for local shops, anything that would pay. Daniel handled the pitching, Kiara handled the execution. At first, no one wanted to hire two broke students. Rejections piled up. Clients laughed at their lack of experience. Some even slammed doors in their faces. But they didn't stop. Daniel had a fire in him. He would walk street to street, visiting small stores, offering to build cheap websites or manage their flyers. Most said no. A few said yes, and those few were enough to start. Their first client was a tiny bakery at the corner of their neighborhood. The owner, a tired old woman, gave them $50 to create a simple online page. Kiara stayed awake for 3 nights, perfecting every detail, determined to prove themselves. When the bakery owner saw the finished product, tears filled her eyes. "You made my little shop look like a real business," she said softly. Word spread. 1 client turned into 3. 3 became 10. Soon they weren't just scraping by, they were surviving. But success was not instant. For every win there were losses. Some clients refused to pay, others disappeared without notice. Bills still haunted them. There were nights they argued about money, about exhaustion, about the risk of it all. Yet every morning they returned to the table, and every night they reminded themselves why they started. Their love was their fuel, their hunger was their fire. The breakthrough came one summer evening. Daniel had managed to pitch their work to a mid-sized clothing brand. It was far bigger than anything they had attempted. If they succeeded, it would change everything. If they failed, it could crush them. The brand's CEO was skeptical. "Why should I trust 2 kids with no office and no track record?" he asked, his voice sharp. Kiara, usually quiet in meetings, leaned forward. Her voice trembled, but her eyes blazed. "Because we will treat your brand like our own, not as a client, but as family. Others may have resources, but no one will fight for your success like we will." The CEO studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. "You have 1 month. Impress me." That month was war. They worked day and night, skipping meals, skipping sleep. Their apartment looked like a battlefield. Papers, sketches, wires everywhere. They poured everything into the project, living on adrenaline and hope. The day of the presentation, Kiara's hands shook as she connected the laptop. Daniel whispered, "We've got this," squeezing her hand. When they finished, the room was silent. The CEO leaned back, steepling his fingers. Then, to their shock, he clapped. "This is brilliant," he said. "You're hired." It was their first big win. That night, they didn't eat noodles. They treated themselves to real food at a cheap diner, burgers and fries. Daniel raised his glass of soda. "To us," he said, his eyes shining. Kiara clinked her glass against his. "To us." And for the first time, they allowed themselves to believe maybe they could really make it. From there, everything accelerated. Word of mouth spread. More clients came. They hired 2 interns, then 4. Their little living room company moved into a small rented office. Months later, when they signed their first 5-figure contract, Daniel and Kiara stood in the empty office, holding hands, tears streaming down their faces. "We did it," she whispered. He pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "No, we did it." They bought new clothes, not out of vanity, but because for once they didn't have to hide the holes in their shoes. They moved into a slightly bigger apartment with working heat and a kitchen that didn't leak. For the first time, home didn't feel like survival. It felt like safety. But the moment that defined them came a year later, when they bought their first house. It wasn't a mansion, not yet, but to them, it was a palace. Small two-story with peeling paint and creaky floors, but it was theirs. They walked through the empty rooms, their laughter echoing against bare walls. Chiara twirled in the living room, her eyes sparkling. "Can you believe this is ours?" Daniel grinned, sweeping her into his arms. "We started with nothing, and now look at us." They celebrated by sleeping on the floor that first night, wrapped in blankets, eating take-out pizza from the box. Chiara fell asleep with her head on Daniel's chest, whispering, "This is only the beginning." And she was right. The small company grew. Their income doubled, then tripled. They expanded into new industries, new markets. Within 3 years, what began as a dream over a cup of noodles had become a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Chiara was proud, not of the wealth, but of the journey. Every wall in their new home, every corner of their office carried the fingerprints of their sacrifices. To the world, they looked unstoppable. To their families, they were a miracle. To each other, they were proof that love and perseverance could conquer even the harshest storms. But as the lights of success grew brighter, so too did the shadows. Daniel began to change, not suddenly but slowly, like a river eroding stone. Late nights turned into absences. Meetings turned into secrets. And though Chiara didn't know it yet, the man who once patched her shoes with tape would one day rip the ground from beneath her feet. For now, though, she smiled, unaware of the storm waiting beyond the horizon. And in that smile lived the sweetest tragedy, because she believed their love was unbreakable. Success is a dangerous thing. It can blind, it can tempt, and sometimes it can poison love. For Daniel, the boy who once shared noodles on library steps, success did not just change his circumstances, it began to change him. At first, it was invisible. He wore the same smile, spoke the same promises, kissed Chiara goodnight with the same warmth. But slowly the warmth cooled. His phone buzzed more often with messages he wouldn't explain. He stayed out later, returning with excuses about late-night meetings. Chiara noticed, of course, but she brushed it away. After all, hadn't they built everything together? Hadn't they survived storms far greater than this? Trust was the foundation of their love, and she refused to doubt him. But trust, as the world would soon remind her, can be the most dangerous weakness. The first step of the trap was paperwork. One evening, Daniel came home carrying a thick folder of documents. He placed it gently on the kitchen counter, where Chiara was preparing dinner. "Just some restructuring for the company," he said casually. "Legal stuff the lawyer recommended. You know how complicated taxes get at this stage. It's all standard." Chiara wiped her hands on a towel, glancing at the stack of papers. The legal terms looked like another language. "I trust you," she said softly, signing where he pointed. He smiled, kissed her cheek, and tucked the papers away. It seemed harmless, it seemed routine, but in those signatures, Chiara had unknowingly begun to surrender everything, her shares, her authority, her claim to the empire she had poured her soul into. Over the following months, the subtle signs multiplied. Daniel started wearing suits far more expensive than before, his cologne sharper, his words colder. He began hosting dinners with investors, dinners where Chiara was no longer invited. "They're just business meetings," he explained when she asked. "You wouldn't enjoy them." She nodded, though her heart sank. Once they had faced the world side by side. Now it felt as though he was slowly closing a door between them. One afternoon she found him in his study, speaking in low tones on the phone. When she entered, he ended the call abruptly. "Who was that?" she asked, curious. "Just a client," he replied too quickly. "Nothing important." But the look in his eyes, the flicker of annoyance, the tightness of his jaw, told her not to ask again. She let it go, out of love, out of faith. The second step of the trap came wrapped in charm. Daniel suggested they consolidate their assets for smoother management. He claimed it would protect them from risk, ensure stability, and simplify their finances. Besides, he said with a smile, what's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine. Haven't we always said that? Kiara's heart melted. Of course they had. Their entire journey was built on unity. She signed again, handing him another piece of her security without realizing it. That night, as they celebrated another business milestone with champagne, Daniel raised his glass high. To us, he said. Kiara smiled, clinking her glass against his. To us, she echoed. But beneath the golden bubbles, Daniel's eyes glinted with something she couldn't name. A hunger, a calculation, a shadow. The third step came with distance. Daniel began traveling frequently, claiming to expand their business abroad. Kiara stayed behind, managing what little access she had left. Whenever she asked for details, he brushed her off with vague reassurances. You worry too much, he laughed. Trust me, everything I do is for us. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. After all, this was the man who once patched her broken shoes with tape, the man who gave her gloves so her hands wouldn't freeze. Surely he couldn't change, could he? But in her quietest moments, doubt crept in. The final step of the trap was betrayal disguised as love. One evening, Daniel returned home with a bouquet of roses and a velvet box. Inside was a diamond bracelet, glittering with wealth they had once only dreamed of. For you, he said, fastening it around her wrist. She stared at it in awe. It's beautiful, but it must have cost so much. He waved away. Her concern. Don't worry about money, that's my job. Your job is just to shine. Tears filled her eyes. She embraced him, whispering, How did I get so lucky to have you? He held her close, smiling over her shoulder. But it wasn't love in his smile. It was victory. For by then, the empire was already his. The documents were signed. The trap was complete. And yet, Daniel played the role of the loving husband flawlessly. He kissed her forehead, spoke sweet words, and continued to hide the knife he had planted in her back. Kiara, blinded by trust, never saw the betrayal coming. Not yet. But soon the papers would surface. The truth would burn. And the man she believed would die for her would reveal that he had only ever been preparing to kill her dreams instead. The salmon grew cold on the table. The candles, once bright with hope, sputtered in silence. Kiara sat frozen, staring at the divorce papers as though they were weapons aimed at her heart. This isn't real, she whispered, her voice trembling. Tell me you're joking, Daniel. Tell me this isn't. He cut her off with a cruel laugh, a sound she had never heard from him before. Stop embarrassing yourself. Do you really think I've stayed with you out of love all this time? This was business, and now the business is mine. Her hands shook violently as she clutched the edge of the table. The man sitting across from her, this stranger in her husband's face, could not be the boy who once patched her shoes with tape. He could not be the man who promised to share even his last slice of bread. But there he was, calm, distant, his heart sealed behind ice. You signed everything away months ago, he reminded her. The company, the house, even the accounts, all legally mine now. You trusted me, and that was your mistake. Kiara's breath caught in her throat. Images flashed in her mind, every signature she had given without question, every document she had trusted him to handle. She had thought she was supporting him. She had thought they were one, but piece by piece she had handed him the keys to her own destruction. Tears blurred her vision. Daniel, please. We built this together. We starved together. I was there through everything. You were a helper, he snapped. Nothing more. And now you're nothing at all. That night, Kiara sat alone at the long dining table. The untouched food turned stale. The roses she had picked that morning drooped in their vase. Across from her, the empty chair screamed louder than any words. She waited for him to return, to tell her it was all a mistake, but he didn't. He slept in the guest room, the door locked. For the first time in years, she felt truly invisible. The days that followed were worse than nightmares. Daniel stopped speaking to her except in clipped, business-like sentences. He spent his time on phone calls she was never allowed to overhear, with people she was never introduced to. At meals, he ate quickly and left without a glance. The house that once echoed with their laughter turned into a tomb. The walls seemed colder, the silence heavier. Chiara tried to reach for him, tried to remind him of who they once were. She cooked his favorite meals. She dressed the way she used to when they were young. She even wrote him letters, slipping them under his study door, pleas for him to remember, to love again. He never replied. One evening she gathered her courage and walked into his office. He was at his desk, typing furiously, the glow of his laptop reflecting off his hardened features. "Daniel," she whispered, "please, look at me. Talk to me." He didn't lift his eyes. "I don't care about the money," she continued, her voice cracking. "I don't care about the company. I just want you. We can start over. Just don't leave me." At that, he finally looked up. His eyes were sharp, cold, unrecognizable. "You still don't get it, do you?" he said flatly. "I don't want you anymore. You're in my way. Sign the divorce papers and disappear quietly. That's the only gift I'm giving you." Her heart shattered. She had begged, humiliated herself, poured out every drop of love she had left, and still he threw her away like nothing. She stumbled out of the office, collapsing in the hallway. For hours she lay there on the cold floor, tears soaking into the carpet, her body shaking with sobs that no one came to soothe. In the following weeks, isolation wrapped around her like chains. Daniel stopped coming home altogether. When he did, it was only to collect files or clothes, leaving the scent of unfamiliar perfume lingering in the air. Chiara's suspicions grew, but she had no strength to confront him. What would be the point? He had already made it clear. Her place in his life was over. At night, she sat by the window, staring at the city lights. She thought of the library where they had first met, of the cheap coffee he once offered her, of the night he gave her his hoodie so she wouldn't shiver. She replayed those memories over and over, trying to understand how the man she loved could vanish while still standing in front of her. Sometimes she whispered to herself, "Maybe he'll come back. Maybe this is just a phase." But the silence answered every time, and the silence never lied. Her appetite disappeared. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping. The once strong woman who had built an empire beside him now sat in the dark, fragile and hollow, her spirit broken under the weight of betrayal. But the cruelest moment came when she visited the company office one afternoon, desperate to feel some connection to what they had built. She walked in, expecting smiles, familiarity. Instead, she was met with cold stares. An assistant approached her awkwardly. "Mrs. Chiara, I'm sorry, but Mr. Daniel instructed us not to let you access the management floor." Her throat went dry. "What do you mean? I'm his wife. This is my company too." The assistant lowered her eyes. "Legally, no. The documents say otherwise." The world spun. She stumbled out of the building, her chest tight, tears streaming down her cheeks. On the sidewalk, surrounded by strangers, she realized the horrifying truth. She no longer had a place there, not in the company, not in his life. She was, in every way, erased. That night, Chiara sat at the dining table once more, staring at the cold, untouched food. The house was silent, but in that silence she heard the echo of his words again and again. "You're nothing at all." For the first time, she believed him. Her heart, once full of dreams, lay in ruins. Her body, once strong with determination, felt weak and empty. Her life, once built on trust and love, had collapsed into dust. She was powerless, broken, alone. And yet, somewhere deep in the ashes of her despair, a single spark remained. It was not hope. Not yet. It was not strength. Not yet. But it was something. Something waiting to ignite. The nights stretched endlessly, each one colder than the last. Chiara wandered through the empty halls of her home like a shadow. She no longer cooked. The dining table was bare. The roses had long withered in their vase, their petals curled and black. One evening she collapsed in the living room, the divorce papers still sitting on the coffee table. Her body shook with sobs, the sound echoing against the walls. She pressed her hands to her face, whispering through tears, "Why? Why did you do this to me, Daniel?" The silence had no answer. Only the ticking of the clock reminded her that time was moving on, even if her life had stopped. Her gaze fell on a small wooden box tucked beneath the bookshelf. It had been untouched for years, a gift from her late mother. With trembling hands, she pulled it out and opened it. Inside lay a faded scarf and a folded letter, yellowed with time. She unfolded the letter and began to read. "My beloved daughter, life will test you. People you love may betray you, but remember, love is not your only weapon. Knowledge is. The world may strip you of wealth, titles, even your name, but it can never take away what you learn. That is your shield. That is your sword. Promise me, you will never stop learning, never stop fighting." Chiara clutched the letter to her chest, her tears falling faster. Her mother's voice filled her heart, louder than the silence, stronger than the pain. Knowledge. She had once believed that love alone was enough, but love had betrayed her. Now she understood. It was knowledge that could set her free. The next morning, for the first time in weeks, she rose early. Her reflection in the mirror startled her, eyes swollen from crying, skin pale from hunger, hair tangled. But within those tired eyes, a spark glimmered. "I am not finished," she whispered to her reflection. "Not yet." She went to the library, the very same place where her story with Daniel had begun. As she walked through the doors, memories flooded her, the cracked tables, the faint smell of dust, the endless shelves of books. But this time, she wasn't there to escape poverty. She was there to reclaim her life. She picked up books on business law, corporate rights, divorce settlements. She devoured every page, scribbling notes until her fingers cramped. The legal terms that once looked like another language began to make sense. She stayed until the library closed, then returned the next day and the next. Every night she whispered to her mother's letter, "I'm learning, Mama. I'm fighting." At first it was overwhelming. She realized the scale of Daniel's deception, how carefully he had planned each signature, each legal move. But instead of despair, it fueled her determination. "He thinks I'm weak," she muttered under her breath, flipping another page. "He thinks I'm naive. Let him think that. By the time I'm finished, he won't recognize me." Her body still ached from heartbreak, but her mind sharpened. She began to piece together a strategy, gathering every bit of evidence she could, copies of old emails, receipts, records of her contributions to the company. It wasn't much, but it was something. And something was enough to begin. One evening, as she sat with piles of papers scattered across her table, the same divorce documents stared back at her. For the first time, she didn't cry looking at them. Instead, she read them carefully, every clause, every word. And there it was, the loophole, a tiny detail Daniel's lawyers had overlooked. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "You made a mistake, Daniel." The fire inside her grew. She no longer felt like a broken woman abandoned in the dark. She felt like a warrior sharpening her blade. Her friends began to notice the change. One afternoon, an old classmate found her at the library. "Chiara, are you all right? You look different, stronger." She simply closed her notebook and replied, "I'm preparing." "For what?" the classmate asked. Chiara's eyes, once dim with despair, now glowed with determination. "For war." That night, Chiara sat by the window, watching the city lights. For weeks they had mocked her loneliness, but now they seemed like stars guiding her forward. She held her mother's letter in her hand, whispering, "You were right, Mama. Love can break, but knowledge builds." I will not be his victim. I will fight, and I will win. Her tears still came, but they were no longer tears of weakness. They were the cleansing rain before the dawn. For the first time since Daniel's betrayal, Chiara fell asleep, not as a broken woman, but as a fighter reborn. The awakening had begun. The morning sun streamed through the window, but this time it didn't feel cruel. For the first time in months, Chiara welcomed it. She rose early, tied her hair back, and spread papers across the dining table, her new battlefield. The woman who once begged for love was gone. The woman who once sat weeping beside cold dinners was gone. What remained was sharper, steadier, and more dangerous than Daniel could ever imagine. Her war had begun. At first, the task was daunting. She had no lawyer, no money, no allies, but she had something stronger, her mother's wisdom and her own relentless mind. She began by gathering every scrap of proof of her contributions. Old emails where Daniel acknowledged her work, receipts of materials she had purchased for the company, handwritten notes in the margins of proposals, the very proposals that later won contracts. Each piece was a stone, small on its own, but together they could build a fortress. Then came the financial records. She combed through old bank statements, finding the transfers she had made from her scholarship stipend into their first business account. Tears stung her eyes as she realized how much of herself she had poured into their dream. But the tears no longer came from weakness, they came from fury. "This company is mine too," she whispered, placing the papers into neat stacks. "And I'll prove it." The next phase was harder, the law. She returned to the library with renewed fire. Day after day, she devoured books on business law, corporate structures, and divorce settlements. The words that once looked foreign now became weapons in her hands. She learned about fiduciary duty, about marital assets, about how even hidden transfers could be traced. She learned the difference between shares on paper and contributions in practice. The more she studied, the clearer the picture became. Daniel had built his empire on lies, but lies left cracks, and cracks could be broken. At night, she filled notebooks with strategies, questions she would ask, clauses she would challenge, loopholes she would exploit. The once broken wife was no longer begging for mercy. She was preparing for battle. But knowledge wasn't enough. She needed someone who believed in her case. After weeks of searching, she found a young lawyer named Eleanor, a woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for fighting against powerful men. At their first meeting, Eleanor listened silently as Chiara laid out her evidence, her voice steady but her hands trembling. When she finished, Eleanor leaned back, impressed. "You've done half my job for me," the lawyer said. "Most clients come with tears. You came with facts. This isn't just a divorce case, Chiara. This is theft, and we can win." For the first time, Chiara allowed herself a smile. "Then let's win." The weeks that followed were grueling. Court filings, witness lists, endless preparation. But Chiara threw herself into it with a discipline born from suffering. Every morning she trained her voice in the mirror, practicing answers for the courtroom. Every night she reviewed documents until her eyes burned. Her body still carried the scars of heartbreak, but her mind was sharper than ever. And beneath the exhaustion, something unexpected returned. Confidence. One evening, as she stood before the mirror rehearsing her testimony, she caught her own reflection and whispered, "You're not nothing. You never were. He just made you forget." For the first time, she believed it. The day of the first hearing arrived. Chiara dressed simply but powerfully. A black suit, minimal jewelry, her mother's scarf tied around her wrist like armor. As she entered the courtroom, whispers filled the air. Everyone had heard the story, the millionaire husband, the erased wife. Daniel was already there, sitting at the front with his team of expensive lawyers. He looked every inch the powerful businessman, tailored suit, polished shoes, arrogance dripping from every movement. When his eyes met hers, he smirked, as though this was just another meeting he would easily dominate. But Chiara didn't look away. Not this time. Her gaze was steady, her chin high. For the first time since their downfall began, she met him not as a wife, begging for love, but as a rival prepared to fight. The proceedings began. Daniel's lawyers presented the case as simple. Chiara had signed over her rights. The documents were clear. The empire belonged to him alone. But when it was her turn, Chiara rose to her feet. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied with each word. "Yes, I signed papers," she admitted, "but I signed them under trust, under the belief that my husband was protecting us both. What he failed to mention was that I funded our early business with my own scholarship, that I worked nights designing the projects he presented, that every milestone we celebrated had my fingerprints on it. I am not an accessory to this empire. I am its co-founder." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Daniel shifted in his seat, the smirk faltering. For the first time, he looked unsettled. Elena then stepped forward, presenting the evidence Chiara had spent months collecting: emails, receipts, bank records, proof that the company's foundation had been built on her sacrifices as much as his. Each piece landed like a hammer blow. And though the judge had not yet given a ruling, Chiara knew the tide had shifted. As the hearing adjourned, Daniel brushed past her, his voice a venomous whisper. "You think you can beat me? You're still nothing, Chiara. This is my world." She turned, her eyes blazing. "Maybe it was, but not anymore. Not after today." For the first time, his jaw tightened, his certainty cracked. And in that crack, Chiara saw victory waiting. That night she returned home exhausted but triumphant. She stood by the window, clutching her mother's letter in her hand. "I'm fighting, Mama," she whispered, "and I will not stop until justice is mine." Her war was far from over. The courtroom battles ahead would be fierce. Daniel would use every trick, every dollar, every ounce of his power to crush her. But Chiara no longer feared him, because she had remembered who she was. And now, Daniel would have to remember it too. The courtroom was packed. "Reporter," is whispered at the back, pens poised, while every seat was filled with curious onlookers. The story of the betrayed wife and the ruthless millionaire had captured the city's attention. Today, it would reach its end. Chiara sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded calmly, her mother's scarf tied at her wrist like a banner of strength. Across the aisle, Daniel leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight, eyes burning with the fury of a man who had never known defeat. The judge entered. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. "This court has reviewed all evidence presented," the judge began, voice firm. "We have examined the financial records, the witness statements, and the signed documents. While the defense argues that Mrs. Chiara willingly signed away her rights, this court finds overwhelming evidence that Mr. Daniel acted in bad faith." Daniel shifted, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear, but the judge continued. "It is clear that Mrs. Chiara was misled, that her contributions to the company were concealed, and that she was systematically erased from an empire she helped build. This court cannot and will not reward deception." The silence broke into gasps. Daniel's face drained of color. The judge's gavel struck. "The company assets, properties, and accounts are hereby restored to joint ownership, with controlling interest granted to Mrs. Chiara. Furthermore, restitution is ordered for damages incurred by Mr. Daniel's fraudulent actions. This court rules in favor of the plaintiff." The gavel fell a final time. Case closed. For a moment, Chiara sat still, the words echoing in her mind. She had dreamed of this moment through sleepless nights, through tears on the cold floor, through the suffocating silence of betrayal. And now, it was real. She turned her head, meeting Daniel's eyes. His expression was no longer arrogant. It was broken, desperate. The EMP Ari had stolen had slipped through his fingers. "You'll regret this," he hissed under his breath. But Chiara only rose gracefully to her feet. "I already regretted loving you," she replied softly, "but I'll never regret fighting back." Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, voices shouted her name, reporters pressed forward, desperate for her words. Kiara held her head high, her voice steady. This victory isn't just mine. It's for every woman who has been silenced, every partner erased, every dream stolen. No one should ever mistake kindness for weakness. No one should ever believe trust is a license for betrayal. Her words carried through the crowd, and for the first time, she felt not just like a survivor, but like a symbol of resilience. Later that evening, she returned to her home, not the cold tomb it once was, but a place alive with new meaning. She placed her mother's letter back into its wooden box, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I did it, Mama," she whispered. "I remembered." She poured herself a glass of water, simple and clear. For years, victory had been tied to wealth, to contracts, to power. But now, sitting alone in the quiet warmth of her home, victory meant something else entirely. It meant freedom. It meant dignity. It meant herself. Daniel vanished from headlines soon after, his empire dismantled, his name tarnished. The world that once bowed to him turned its back, and he faded into obscurity. Kiara, meanwhile, rose higher. She rebuilt the company, not as a kingdom of greed, but as a home for dreamers like her former self, students, strugglers, fighters. Her story spread, inspiring countless others to stand up, to fight, to believe. And though the scars of betrayal never fully disappeared, they became her armor, proof that she had walked through fire and emerged unburned. On a quiet Sunday morning, she walked once more to the library where it had all begun. She sat at the same table, the rain tapping softly at the windows. For the first time, she smiled at the memory of the boy she had met there, the boy who offered her a sandwich, who spoke of dreams. That boy was gone, but the woman who had survived him was stronger than ever. As she closed her notebook, she whispered to herself, "I am not nothing. I never was." And with that, Kiara rose, walking into the rain, not broken, not betrayed, but victorious. Family, you've walked with us through this entire journey, from the humble beginnings of love and sacrifice to the cruelty of betrayal and finally to Kiara's victory. Her story isn't just about marriage or business or betrayal. It is about the one truth her mother left her with, the truth that carried her from weakness to strength. Knowledge is power. We saw how trust without wisdom nearly destroyed her. But we also saw how courage mixed with knowledge gave her the strength to fight back, to rise, and to win. And that is the lesson for all of us. Never let anyone take advantage of your kindness. Never hand over your life blindly. Protect your heart, but also sharpen your mind. Because when love fades, when people betray you, when the world seems against you, it is your knowledge, your wisdom that will light your path forward. Family, I want you to remember this. You are not nothing. You are more powerful than you think. You carry within you the strength to rebuild, to rise, and to stand tall, no matter how badly life tries to break you. And before we close, my prayer for you is this. May you never fall into the hands of betrayal. May you always have the wisdom to see through lies, the courage to fight for yourself, and the peace to know your true worth. Now I turn to you, family. I want to hear from you. What part of Kiara's journey touched your heart the most? What lesson will you carry forward in your own life? Write your thoughts in the comments below. Your words may be the inspiration someone else needs today. Stay strong, stay wise, and remember, knowledge will always be your greatest weapon.